On September 2, 2013, journalists from all over the world gathered in the small Polish city of Kielce for the International Defense Industry Exhibition. None of those present suspected that in just a few hours, their articles would land on front pages from Washington to Tokyo. Inside the exhibition pavilion, hidden beneath a black cloth, waited something that was supposed to forever change the perception of the Polish defense industry. When the fabric fell, the crowd was struck silent. Before them stood a machine that looked like a prop from a science fiction movie. Sharp geometric lines, matte gray panels, and a turret that resembled the cockpit of a next-generation fighter jet more than a traditional tank dome. This was the PL-01, the Polish tank of the future, which, according to its creators, was to be practically invisible to enemy radar and thermal imagers. The reaction of the world press was immediate and enthusiastic. The British publication Guardian called it the most futuristic combat vehicle in history. American Forbes wrote about a revolution in armored vehicle design. German military magazines anxiously analyzed the capabilities of a machine that could theoretically sneak up on their Leopards within direct fire range before anyone even noticed its presence. The internet was flooded with comparisons to the American B-2 Spirit bomber, one of the most famous symbols of stealth technology. And Poland, a country previously associated by many with food products and labor, suddenly looked like a serious player in the global arms race. To understand why this presentation caused such a stir, one must go back to the early 90s. After the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, Poland inherited an arsenal of Soviet weapons that looked more outdated with each passing year. The backbone of Polish tank units remained the T-72, a design from the 60s, and first-generation infantry fighting vehicles that remembered the Brezhnev era. Modernizing such equipment required enormous amounts of money, and Polish generals understood perfectly well that in a clash with modern Western systems, their armor would be in a losing position. The first attempts to create an indigenous tank began back in the 90s. A project codenamed Gorilla envisioned a third-generation machine capable of competing with the best tanks on the planet. The plan was so ambitious that it implied not just a tank, but an entire line of equipment, from self-propelled howitzers to anti-aircraft systems. However, a chronic lack of funding and political instability took their toll. The Gorilla never moved beyond preliminary sketches. The documents went into the archives, and soldiers continued to drive their Soviet heritage. The next attempt was the Anders, named after General Władysław Anders, a hero of World War II. This multi-purpose platform was shown in 2010. It was meant to be the base for a whole family of vehicles. Engineers from the Obram Center assembled a rather unusual kit: a Swedish chassis, a German diesel engine, and a Swiss 120mm cannon in a Belgian turret. Visually, it all resembled the Israeli Merkava, but specialists almost immediately saw a fundamental problem. The Anders turned out to be too light to be a full-fledged tank and too heavy to be a reconnaissance vehicle. The project stalled, failing to spark much interest from either the Polish army or potential foreign buyers. And that was when the idea was born to make not another compromise, but something fundamentally new. In 2013, Obram engineers began collaborating with the British military industry giant BAE Systems. The goal was not to patch up old solutions, but to create a machine that would be at least a couple of decades ahead of its time. The team bet on stealth technologies, something previously applied in aviation and the Navy. No one had seriously tried to build a tank before that would be low observable to radar and thermal imagers. And the Poles decided to be the first. The technical specifications announced to journalists in Kielce sounded like pages from a fantasy novel. The PL-01 was supposed to weigh only 35 tons, which is less than half the mass of the American Abrams, but at the same time provide comparable protection thanks to innovative ceramic aramid armor. The main weapon planned was a 120mm cannon according to North Atlantic Treaty Organization standards, with the ability to fire not only conventional shells, but also guided anti-tank missiles. The turret was completely unmanned. This meant that the crew of 3 sat in an armored capsule in the front of the hull, maximally protected from a direct hit. But the real sensation was caused by the camouflage systems. The hull was promised to be covered with panels that absorb radio waves, similar to the coatings on stealth aircraft, and on top of that, a revolutionary thermal camouflage. Tiles with controlled temperature on the hull and turret could change the thermal signature of the vehicle so that on a thermal imager screen, the tank would look like a passenger car or a tourist bus. If the promises were to be believed, this was supposed to overturn armored combat tactics, giving the ability to conduct sudden night strikes when the enemy literally cannot see the target. Defense Minister Tomasz Siemoniak proudly declared that serial production would begin in 2018, and Poland would be ready to export the new tanks to allies, including Ukraine, which would soon have to face war in the east of its territory. The world looked at Poland with both disbelief and admiration. Had this small Central European player technologically leapfrogged the United States, Germany, and Russia? The answer came faster than many expected and turned out to be far less spectacular than the presentation in Kielce. Stealth technology had until then remained the domain of the world's most expensive military projects. The Americans spent billions of dollars on the B-2 Spirit and F-22 fighters, but no one dared to transfer this concept to ground armor. Obram engineers, together with BAE Systems, claimed they would do the nearly impossible, a tank that would be practically invisible to most modern detection systems. The heart of the system was supposed to be thermal tiles installed over the entire surface of the hull and turret. Small elements, resembling thin wafers, could very precisely regulate temperature. When the engine is running at full speed and emitting huge amounts of heat, the tiles supposedly cool the outer surface of the armor to the ambient temperature. On a thermal imager screen, 35 tons of steel would look like a piece of the landscape, a tree, a stone, or cold earth. But that was not the limit. The system promised not only to hide the thermal signature, but also to fake it. An operator could set a mode in which the tank turns into another object for the thermal imager. Advertising materials showed the PL-01 becoming a car, a bus, or a pedestrian. From a tactical point of view, it looked like a cheat code that no army in the world had yet. Complementing the picture was the radio-absorbing coating. Combined with angular geometry designed to scatter electromagnetic waves, the tank could theoretically approach within direct fire range before the enemy's early warning systems even realized what was happening. Experts compared this to British Challenger 2 experiments in reducing observability, but emphasized that the Polish concept went much further. The turret in the project was a separate breakthrough. Unmanned and remotely controlled by the crew from the armored capsule, it removed one of the most painful points of classical tanks. In conventional designs, a hit to the turret often means the death of the commander and gunner. In the PL-01, the commander, gunner, and driver were in a reinforced compartment separated from the ammunition and the autoloader. The fire control system promised everything according to the latest standards. 2 independent sights for the commander and gunner, day cameras, third-generation thermal imagers, and laser rangefinders. The commander's panoramic device provided a hunter-killer mode, where the commander searches for targets and marks them, and the gunner immediately destroys them without transferring control over the turret. All data was on color displays with 360-degree circular awareness. The 120mm cannon, according to North Atlantic Treaty Organization standards, meant compatibility with a large number of Allied munitions. The autoloader promised a rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute, with a total ammunition load of 45 rounds, 16 of which were supposedly in the turret magazine ready for instant use, and the rest in an isolated hull compartment to increase crew safety if hit. Additional armament included a 7.62mm machine gun with 1,000 rounds and a remotely controlled weapon station on the turret roof. Depending on the configuration, this could be a heavy 12.7mm machine gun, a lighter 7.62mm gun, or a 40mm automatic grenade launcher. Flexibility, as promised, allowed the vehicle to be tailored for different roles, from infantry support to anti-aircraft self-defense. An active protection system was to be the last line of defense against anti-tank weapons. Sensors on the turret fixed incoming guided missiles and projectiles, after which interceptor charges were automatically launched. This was complemented by smoke grenade launchers around the perimeter, capable of putting up a screen in any direction in a fraction of a second, as well as a laser warning system so the crew would understand if they were already being targeted by a high-precision weapon. The armor was modular, made of layers of ceramic and aramid fibers. It was promised to be replaceable directly in field conditions. A damaged module is removed and a new one is installed in just a few dozen minutes. This reduces repair costs and provides the ability to quickly strengthen protection against new threats. According to the developers, the armor could withstand hits from 30 and 40mm calibers from any direction, and in the frontal hemisphere, even larger calibers. The engine was a diesel with 940 horsepower, an automatic transmission, and a torque converter. It reached speeds up to 70 kilometers per hour on the highway and up to 50 kilometers per hour cross-country. The cruising range on one tank was about 500 kilometers. The suspension on 7 road wheels with active shock absorbers provided stability while moving and firing. On paper, everything looked impressive, but some specialists from the very beginning asked questions that became louder and louder. How can 35 tons provide protection on the level of 60? Was the thermal masking tested in real conditions rather than just in a presentation? And most importantly, does Poland have the technological and financial resources to bring this to serial production? The answers to these questions very soon shocked everyone who believed in the Polish tank revolution. Serious doubts appeared even before the euphoria from the premiere in Kielce had time to subside. Investigators and independent military analysts began to ask uncomfortable questions that representatives of Obram and BAE Systems did not give clear answers to. One analyst asked to see the inside of the machine and was politely refused under the pretext of military secrecy. Another asked about the results of field tests of the thermal camouflage and was told that work was ongoing. These evasive formulations only reinforced the suspicion that a much more prosaic reality lay behind the spectacular shell. And the truth turned out to be harsh and humiliating for the Polish defense industry. The futuristic tank of the future, which promised to overturn the battlefield, turned out to be a non-working mock-up vehicle. Under the gray panels with geometric edges was a slightly modified chassis of the Swedish CV-90 infantry fighting vehicle, simply covered in plastic for the sake of science fiction at the exhibition. The turret was a dummy, the gun could not fire, and the revolutionary thermal masking systems existed only in computer presentations and advertising materials. The Russian press was one of the first to mercilessly ridicule Poland's armored ambitions. In one review, journalists joked that the stealth capability of the PL-01 worked so perfectly that the tank itself had completely disappeared from reality. The joke was painful because it hit the mark. The invisible tank turned out to be invisible for exactly one reason, because it essentially did not exist as a combat vehicle. Western experts approached the topic more calmly, but the conclusions were no less devastating. The main problem of the concept was in the base. The CV-90 is an infantry fighting vehicle chassis. It is lighter and more weakly protected than that of a real main battle tank. The attempt to make it a machine for direct confrontation with tanks was doomed from the start. 35 tons on such a chassis cannot provide 60-ton level protection regardless of what you call the materials. Another complaint concerned the layout. The engine was in the front. This is a typical scheme for infantry fighting vehicles where the troop compartment is in the back. For a tank, this is controversial. Useful volume that could have been spent on armor or ammunition is lost. Moreover, the rear part of the PL-01 hull actually retained the ability to carry several infantrymen, and this finally confirmed. We were looking at a disguised infantry fighting vehicle, not a full-fledged tank. The declared combat capabilities also came under fire. The 120mm cannon planned for installation belonged to low-recoil systems, originally designed for light platforms. Its power was inferior to the full-fledged tank guns found on Abrams and Leopards. In a direct clash, the PL-01 would have found itself in an extremely disadvantageous position, weaker armor and a weaker weapon. The problem was also that the very idea of a stealth tank conflicted with the reality of modern combat. Tanks are more often detected visually, by noise, or by heat, rather than by radar. Thus, the bet on radar stealth looked like a solution looking for a problem. Yes, thermal camouflage could complicate detection at night, but none of the shown prototypes contained a working system of this type. Polish military officials found themselves in an awkward position. On one hand, public money and prestige. On the other, a wave of criticism that was increasingly difficult to ignore. The defense minister initially stuck to the official line about a breakthrough, but over time the rhetoric became noticeably more cautious. Instead of specific deadlines, there was talk of further research and long-term perspectives. And then came the moment that finally finished off the Polish project. On May 9, 2015, at the Moscow parade dedicated to the 70th anniversary of the victory over fascism, the world first saw the Russian T-14 Armata tank. Unlike the Polish exhibition dummy, this was a full-fledged combat model, an unmanned turret, modern protection, and the Afinit active countermeasure system. Russia declared plans for mass production, and this caused nervousness in Western headquarters. For Polish planners, this became a harsh clash with reality. Even if the PL-01 had by some miracle been brought to serial production, it would not have been able to effectively oppose new generation tanks. A light vehicle based on an infantry fighting vehicle with a low recoil gun has no chance against a heavy tank protected by modern solutions. Poland required real main battle tanks, not futuristic concepts that look good at an exhibition but are not fit for battle. The decision to close the project was made quietly, without loud press conferences. At some point, people simply stopped talking about the PL-01. The last mentions in official documents date to the beginning of 2016, when the Ministry of National Defense announced a change in armored vehicle program priorities. Instead of replacing the old T-72 with a new indigenous machine, it was decided to close the deficit with modernized and imported platforms. Financial expenditures were never publicly disclosed, but one thing is clear. The mock-up machine itself and the massive advertising campaign consumed serious defense budget funds, plus money for research and development that ultimately ended in a dead end. Critics calculated that with these resources, several dozen used Leopard 2 tanks could have been bought from Germany, or existing T-72 tanks could have been deeply modernized to the PT-91 Twardey level. Poland then followed the path of urgently closing the gaps. In 2013, they signed a contract to buy 147 used Leopard 2A4 tanks from Germany. Later, they bought additional batches, including A5, which they planned to bring to the Leopard 2 Polish modernization standard. The deal was expensive but provided the most important thing: quick access to proven equipment capable of actually fighting, rather than just impressing the exhibition public. In 2023, Poland took an even more radical step by signing a contract to purchase 250 Abrams tanks of the M1A1 modification from American military stocks. Yes, these machines are older than the newest versions, but in terms of capabilities, they still surpassed everything the Polish industry could offer in the coming decades. The irony of fate was cruel. It was precisely from such dependence on foreign supplies that the PL-01 project was supposed to save Poland. Simultaneously, they developed the project of the new Borsuk infantry fighting vehicle to replace worn-out Soviet first-generation machines, and this further complicated the theoretical comeback of the PL-01 idea. Keeping two different tracked platforms in service, the Borsuk and a hypothetical light tank based on the CV-90 would mean a logistical nightmare. It was much more reasonable to focus resources on one national project and cover the tanks with imports. The fate of the mock-up is still shrouded in rumors. According to unofficial information, the exhibition vehicle was returned to the Obram Enterprise in Gliwice, where it supposedly sits abandoned next to another unsuccessful infantry fighting vehicle project, the BWP-2000. Photos leaked onto the internet show a dusty, neglected construction. Panels are falling off in places, and the ordinary Swedish chassis is visible underneath. A sad end for a machine that for a brief moment became a symbol of Polish technological ambitions. The American magazine National Interest allowed itself a bit of bitter irony in one review. The stealth technology in the PL-01 turned out to be so effective that the entire program completely disappeared from radar. The joke sounded funny, but accurately conveyed the mood of everyone who once believed in the Polish tank of the future. 7 years after the quiet closure of the PL-01, almost no one remembered it. It seemed the story had ended forever, and Poland had buried the dream of its own modern tank. But on August 26, 2022, a turn occurred that no one expected. The Ministry of National Defense announced the signing of a historic framework agreement with South Korea for the supply of 980 K2 Black Panther tanks. The contract became one of the largest in the history of the Polish army. The purchase of Korean tanks was already a sensation, but the real surprise was hidden in the details. On September 7th of the same year, during the exhibition in Kielce, exactly where the PL-01 had debuted 9 years earlier, the Polish Armaments Group signed a memorandum of cooperation with the Hyundai Rotem Company. The document concerned not only the production and maintenance of the K2, but also the joint development of a new generation tank, currently designated as the K3. When Hyundai Rotem showed the first visualizations of the future K3, observers immediately noticed a striking resemblance to the Polish project of past years. The Korean concept also implied stealth, reduced radar and thermal signatures, an unmanned turret, remote control, and the placement of the crew in an armored capsule at the front. Some commentators said directly, "The Koreans took Polish ideas and are simply going to bring them to reality with their own resources." According to officially unconfirmed reports, within the framework of the K2 agreements, the Polish side could have transferred the PL-01 project documentation to partners in Seoul. If this is true, it turns out that years of research were not completely lost. Ideas that Poland could not realize due to budget constraints and the industrial base can be embodied thanks to Korean resources and production scales. The K3 is meant to be a machine that surpasses everything driving on battlefields today. The main weapon planned is a 130mm cannon, significantly more powerful than the usual 120mm guns found on most Western main battle tanks. The power plant is a hybrid diesel-electric, and in the future, hydrogen fuel cells. This provides a quieter ride and reduces thermal visibility. Next-generation active protection should work not only against anti-tank weapons, but also against drones, the scourge of all modern conflicts. The mass of the K3 should not exceed 55 tons, meaning it will fall between the light philosophy of the unfinished PL-01 and the heavy Western giants. The hull length is stated to be about 10 meters and 80 centimeters. The width is approximately 3 meters and 60 centimeters. The height is only 2 meters and 40 centimeters. The low profile combined with masking technologies makes the vehicle an extremely difficult target. According to the schedule, the K3 should enter service around 2040. Yes, it is far off, but the company is demonstrating step-by-step progress. In 2023, an updated concept was shown at the ADEX exhibition, and an even more refined version at Eurosatory in 2024. The company has registered an industrial design, which usually indicates the seriousness of intentions. Poland is listed as a key partner in this project. The memorandum in Kielce suggests that a significant part of K3 production will be carried out at Polish enterprises with the participation of Polish contractors and technologies. This is no longer a simple purchase of finished machines, but a model of joint production. If the plan works, in a few years, Poland will become a co-producer of one of the most modern tanks in the world. And here the story of the PL-01 suddenly looks not so much like a failure as a premature vision. Polish engineers really did guess the direction of armored vehicle development. Unmanned turrets, crew capsules, reduced visibility, active protection. They simply lacked the resources to bring the idea into metal. Now these same thoughts, reinforced by Korean experience and capital, can take real form. Perhaps in 15 years, a tank will appear on proving grounds that finally fulfills the promises made on that September day in Kielce. And the PL-01 mock-up supposedly still stands somewhere in a corner of the Obram territory, covered in dust and cobwebs. But the spirit of the project lives on in the drawings, calculations, and computer models that Polish and Korean engineers are now working on together. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war, and sometimes the craziest ideas simply require more time and the right partners to become reality. If this story hooked you and you want more tales of military projects that changed or could have changed the course of history, give it a like and write in the comments which equipment you want to hear about next time. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new episodes. See you soon.